Hello everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode, I'm going to be looking at cycling in bad weather. Now, this is something that I feel quite strongly about, if I'm honest, and this may come across during the episode. But I feel that a lot of triathletes, they really don't do themselves justice in their training. They don't do enough to prepare for the possibility of having to ride in bad weather on race day. And we have a habit of, if it's anything but over 20 degrees and blue skies, I'll sit inside and I'll ride the turbo trainer, because, I just don't fancy going out in that. And the result of that is that if you turn up on race day and it's raining cats and dogs, if it's blowing a hoolie, if it is, even just sort of a lot colder than you're used to riding in, this is the kind of thing that is going to really derail your performance. If you have spent hundreds of hours preparing for your race, if you spent thousands on, the equipment, travel, accommodation, all of this, and you arrive and the conditions out there are just grim, if it is really high winds, if it is sort of temperatures that you can't imagine yourself riding in, a lot of that preparation that you've done is going to go out the window. As triathletes on the bike, we are obsessed, many of us, with the idea of getting free speed. Okay, so this could, basically the idea is that you go faster for the same effort. So if we look at the example of upgrading from, say, a hybrid bike, with tyres that can be ridden off-road, onto a road bike, which narrow tyres, much lighter. That's a way of getting sort of free speed. We could be pushing the pedals around just as hard, but we can go faster. And as you get further and further into your journey through the sport, you can then start looking at aero upgrades. You can start looking at ways to shave weight off of your bike. You can look at ways of improving the efficiency of your drivetrain. The aerodynamics of the frame, your position. There are all of these sort of, I wouldn't say shortcuts, but all these strategies that we can employ to make us faster for the same effort. So, why wouldn't we? Makes perfect sense. Now, some triathletes do get too bogged down in this and they forget the bigger picture, actually doing the training. But having confidence of riding in bad weather is just such an easy way to build up confidence, to get free speed if you turn up on race day and the conditions are anything short of perfect, which, I'll be honest, it's very rare that conditions are perfect on race day. So by improving our confidence, our ability and knowledge surrounding this area, it is a great way for us to be able to go faster for less effort. And if you're confident riding downhill in the wet, then you are going to be making up minutes, in some cases, on people who are much fitter than you, but who are tentatively sat there riding their brakes on the downhill, starting to shake a little bit out of fear because they feel so out of control of the situation that they're in. Now, a lot of this sort of fear of this sort of being in this situation of riding in bad weather is simply a result of them avoiding it thus far. I understand completely how for some people training outside regularly is very difficult. Now, it could be a time constraint thing. Riding indoors is a lot more time efficient than riding outside. There can also be an element of not having roads that are suitable to ride on. I've worked training an athlete who lived in India, and it really wasn't very safe for him to be able to go out riding on the roads around because the roads are in really poor condition. The drivers have zero understanding or respect for cyclists. And, some areas of India, they're not especially safe. If somebody sees somebody riding around on a high value object like that, they might go, you know what, I think I'll have that. And, he didn't feel confident for all of those reasons riding outside. And it's hard for me as a coach to push back against that. There's also, for those who live in the sort of the depths of, not the depths, but, sort of who live quite northern or areas, sort of Canada, Northern Europe, sort of Norway, Finland, those areas. It could be that it is simply impossible for them to go riding sort of 4 or 5 months of the year outside because of the snow. And something that I guess I want to push home here is that you should never go out riding in conditions when you're training that genuinely make you feel unsafe. If there is any risk of ice, it's a hard no. No way, you should not be heading out riding outside if there's any ice. If there is snow, again, I would probably recommend against heading out. I would probably be on the turbo trainer myself because if nothing else, the air temperature is going to be so low that it's going to be a bit of a miserable ride. However, if the temperatures are in sort of the double digits in Celsius, so if we're looking at sort of the temperatures about sort of 10 degrees and upwards, if there'd be no risk of ice at that temperature. If it's maybe the roads are maybe a bit wet, if it's a bit drizzly even, look, we've just got to get out there and we've just got to ride outside sometimes. I don't want you to be there thinking to yourself, oh, you know what, it's just easier for me to do all my riding indoors. Because I want to expose you in your training to the kind of conditions that are going to be worse than anything you could possibly experience on race day. If you're doing a race such as Ironman Austria or Ironman Florida, races which are renowned for, relatively calm, consistent weather conditions for the most part, then you are going to be exposing yourself by heading out in those kinds of temperatures. You're going to be exposing yourself to far worse than anything you will experience on race day. Now, if you're taking on a race such as Ironman Wales, 7.3 Weymouth, if you're taking sort of on any sort of later season events in parts of the world that are a bit hillier, a bit wetter, there's no guarantees. But if you are taking on an event that's held in the warmer months in a climate which is relatively predictable, by exposing yourself to these conditions in training, you're going to be able to take anything that the climate, or pretty much anything that the climate can throw at you at the time of year that your race is held, in your stride. Whereas those who just sat there and they just rode on the turbo trainer, they did nearly all, if not all, of their bike miles on the turbo trainer. If they then turn up on race day and it's suddenly raining cats and dogs, then they are, well, if nothing else, they're going to be much slower than they could be. Some people may even go there and go, I can't ride in that. I can't. And they wouldn't even start the race. So by exposing yourself in training to the kind of thing that will really impact how you... I think that if you were to take somebody who is incredibly confident in bad weather, as opposed to somebody who's just been isolated on the turbo trainer, if the conditions on the day were bad, I reckon, over an Ironman, let's say, I think, depending on the course, that individual could be going, 5, maybe in some cases 10 minutes faster than somebody who is not confident in those conditions. That's assuming that the person who has never ridden in bad weather before doesn't manage to crash their bike on the way round because they don't know how to handle the bike in the wet. But yeah, assuming all things being equal, I think that it's not only the speed at which you feel that you can take the corners themselves, it's also how early you start braking ahead of these wet corners. It's the confidence you can have of riding through bits of water. Again, sometimes you can end up with in really heavy rain. If you have a downhill section, there can be a bit of a river that can run down the side of the road in some cases, or even across the road. And this is the kind of thing that can cause some people to just slam on the brakes and they lose their mettle. While there's others, they can slice straight through all these hazards and ride within their limits. But on really hilly courses, really twisty courses, this is when this really comes into play. The hillier, the twistier the roads are, the more that your confidence in bad weather is going to be a secret weapon. If you are taking on a course which is relatively flat, there aren't many corners, it's not that eventful, then to be honest, there wouldn't be as much of a difference to the handling aspect of the bike at least. But in addition to the road conditions themselves, we've also got temperature, we've also got wind. there's a lot that comes with this, so I'm going to go through all of these in a bit more detail to help give you an idea of the best way for you to prepare and to handle these curveballs that can be thrown at you on race day. Now, you may be thinking, well, Simon, I'm taking on a race that has no history of ever having any bad weather, or like if it being extremely infrequent. I can just afford to spend all this time on the turbo train. I can afford to just ride indoors for all of my training, be fine on race day. And you know what? It might be. However, I do think that riding out in sort of bad weather in these tough conditions, it builds resilience in an athlete. There's something about coming back from a cold ride or from a ride in the rain that just helps you just become a sort of a tougher, more resilient version of yourself. It really will test you, it really will push you in some ways. And I'm not suggesting that your first ride outside should be in the middle of winter in really cold weather. That's jumping in too soon, too much too soon. But you should be thinking about on days where it's kind of a bit on the edge. You're thinking, I'm going to talk myself into riding on the turbo. But you need to go, no, I'm going to get myself outside. And as you gain more confidence with this, as you gain more experience riding in these poor conditions, you can sort of ride in progressively sort of worse conditions. Now, if it is raining hard, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be on the turbo trainer. In years gone by, I would have headed out. These days, I'm a bit older, I'm a bit wiser. I know when it is that I sort of need to draw the line. However, I have done enough rides in heavy rain to know how to handle my bike in the rain, and I'm probably not going to learn an enormous amount by going out in that heavy rain. So I'm not saying throw yourself at it with reckless abandon, but what I am suggesting is that, on those days where you think you're about to talk yourself into doing a ride indoors, then you should head outside. And I think sort of a part of the reason that so many, a lot of athletes seem to find themselves sort of magnetically attracted to their turbo trainer is that a number of the athletes that I've worked with over the years, they're the kind of people who are used to the finer things in life. They're the kind of people who, if they just finished sort of a meeting somewhere, then they would hail a taxi to drive them half a mile down the road to get to the train station rather than walk, because they didn't want to get wet. And they have sort of the means to do so. But when you get used to sort of shielding yourself from any kind of adversity, if you get used to doing, just sort of I'm not going to say sort of taking shortcuts or anything like that, but if you are used to sort of living a life of comfort, living a life of luxury, then heading out in the rain and the wind and the cold, that kind of flies in the face of that a little bit. And they go, well, yeah, but it's more efficient for me to ride on the turbo trainer because of, X, Y, and Z. But again, if you find yourself on race day and you have no experience of riding in these conditions and, the weather is poor, you're going to see your performance absolutely devastated by your inability to ride on these. So I do encourage, even though it is it's an uncontrollable environment, the weather conditions change, and that will definitely create some anxiety in some people. If you're riding on the turbo trainer, if you're running on the treadmill, if you're swimming in the pool, this is all very controllable, and we can sit there, we can track all of our data, and everything can be nice and perfect. But race day isn't a controlled environment. It's not a gym. It's not a pain cave. It's not a lab, okay? This is racing in all weathers, in all conditions. Something you should probably do as an exercise ahead of an event, if you are targeting sort of one like big A race, is to look at what the weather has historically been at that event. Now, I know that the Ironman website, if you log on to the page for a race, it will tell you what the average temperatures are. Sort of water temperature, air temperature. I think they have max air temperature to give you an idea of the kind of conditions you can expect. And also, so if you see that the average air temperature is going to be around sort of the low 20 degrees Celsius, the chance of you having to be out there and having to ride in really low temperatures, they are quite low. So you don't need to worry about practicing that so much. Whereas if you see that the average air temperature is about 16 degrees, then you do need to get yourself, because when you start the event in the morning, if it is a race in the spring or in the autumn, you do need to get yourself out there. You do need to get used to riding in cold temperatures, because there's a good chance you'll come out of that. You'll come out of a cold lake into a sort of a low air temperature, and you need to have kind of the ability and the experience of riding in these colder temperatures, of knowing what it is that you should be wearing, knowing how it affects you, so that you can you can complete that in sort of the best way possible, that allow you to actually take the fitness that you have built from your turbo training sessions, from all the training that you've done, and actually be able to put it all together on the day. If you have decided to yourself, you know what, I'm going to listen to Simon's advice and I'm going to get out on the bike in conditions that I wouldn't normally, that's great. But what we need to do first is decide, well, which bike is it that we're taking? If you only have one bike, then decision made. But many triathletes will have more than one bike. It could be that they have, most often they'll have a training bike, which would be a road bike, and a race bike. Which again, it could be a sort of a higher end road bike, or it could be a triathlon bike. And I would always recommend, if you are, especially when you're new to riding in these kinds of conditions, you always want to make sure that you're taking out the bike that you don't race on, to start with at least, into these poor conditions, because it's the bike that hopefully will be a bit more rugged, that you'll be a bit more used to. And this is a great chance for you to be able to just get used to riding in these sorts of conditions. As you get closer to race day, however, as once you get within the last sort of 3, maybe 4 months ahead of your event, then you probably want to start thinking, if you have a race bike, about taking that out into the poor conditions. Now, this might horrify some people. What? My triathlon bike, my race bike, you want me to take that out in bad weather? Yeah, I do, because you'll be riding it in bad weather on race day. And learning to be able to ride in the time trial position is great, it's important, but be able to ride in the time trial position in the wet, again, that is something that you need to practice. Now, I know a lot of triathletes, they will spend a lot of money on their bike, and they will see it as, being something they need to protect at all costs. It's almost a piece of art to be hung on the wall. But we have bought the bike to ride. It's a tool. I have a race bike downstairs. I absolutely adore my Cervelo P3. It's got little scratches to it. It's got damage to the paintwork. Why? Because I've been riding that bike for 9 years. It is an absolute workhorse of a bike, and it's just as fast with those bits of damage from me riding it in lots of different conditions and transporting it around to races. It's just as fast as if it were in absolute pristine condition. So please don't get yourself stressed out. Please don't worry yourself about, oh yes, but I've got to make sure that I keep my race bike absolutely perfect, because on race day it's not going to end up perfect, and we need to practice riding it in different conditions, especially wind. If we have deep wheels, if we buy some deep set wheels, even a disc wheel, we need to get riding with those outdoors so that we know how they handle in different conditions. Now, I'm not suggesting that you take that bike out for all of your outdoor riding, because especially if you've got nice expensive wheels, there is only so many sort of big potholes that you want to expose them to. If you whacked a really big pothole really hard on your race bike when you're out training, then there is a chance you could really do some damage to that wheel. Whereas if you did it on a cheaper wheel, it would be absolutely fine. So I'm not saying you need to do all your riding on it, but you need to do some riding on those wheels in those conditions so that you can handle that come race day. Now, if you take any bike out in poor weather, you need to clean the bike when you get back. And again, this is another reason not to ride outside. And it's another reason why I, as with many people, will opt for turbo training, especially for shorter rides. If it's only an hour ride, then you'll probably spend as much time getting ready and packing everything down as you will actually riding. It's completely impractical for midweek training. But for your weekend rides, if you've got a 2-hour ride, do it outside if you can, rather than inside. But when you get back, you need to make sure that you wash your bike. So it's a case of hosing it down, spraying on some bike cleaner, degreasing the drivetrain, adding some lubricant, because as you ride along in poor weather conditions, all of this on the road, the sort of the salt and the water and the grit, it all gets flicked up, and it tends to stick to your chain quite a bit because of the lubricant on the chain. It acts and it attracts all this dirt, and this dirt will eat away at your cycle, at the components, all your cycle components. So your cassette, your chain set, your chain, these will all start to be worn down as you are sort of riding in these poor conditions. So it's really important that you wash the bike when you get back to avoid there being any sort of unnecessary damage to the bike. Many professional athletes will do all of their training on the turbo indoors. But there are also professional triathletes who do a lot of riding outside in all conditions. And of course, what may be bad conditions and all weather for a professional triathlete who has based himself somewhere that is perfect conditions for training could be very different to somebody else in other parts of the world. But the reason that they do that, and the reason they ride their race bike out in those conditions, is because they take bike maintenance very seriously. It's not optional. You cannot afford to sort of put your bike in for a service a fortnight before your race and be handed a bill for several £1,000s for all of the components that have been damaged and worn because you couldn't be bothered to re-grease things because you couldn't, you didn't wash it down, you didn't clean the drivetrain at the end of your sessions. Bike maintenance is not optional, it is essential, especially when you are riding out in bad weather. But it can be done. It's just something that I would, you have to make up your own mind over, when it is that it's suitable for riding indoors, when it is that you're riding outdoors. If, of course, somebody's a professional triathlete, their life is training. So they'll have a lot more time to do maintenance, to clean their bike after sessions. I'm not saying that any extreme is sort of the right way to go, whether you do all your riding outdoors or all your riding indoors. But we do need to say, look, we need to toughen up and we need to do more sessions outdoors. If you listen to a lot of sort of cyclists, road cyclists, and you talk to them about riding in winter, they'll often talk about having a winter bike. And you may ask yourself, do I need a winter bike? The answer is no. If you're a triathlete and you have a road bike, that is your winter bike, really. Don't get me wrong, if money's no object, if you just like buying bikes, if you do want to get yourself a bike that is sort of a cheaper road bike, that's a bit of a beater, that you can ride in the winter months, you can have a really nice road bike that you ride in the summer months, and you have a triathlon bike that you ride at triathlon events. Again, I'm not going to stop you. But for most people, 2 bikes is probably enough. Although that doesn't mean that we wouldn't need sort of specific kit for riding in the colder months. So the first one I'm going to recommend is to make sure that you have some nice wide tyres if you're going to be doing, lots of riding outside in the cooler weather. Now, by having a wider tyre that's going to be more stable, and you're going to have more grip in contact with the road as you go around corners. Now, if a corner is wet, then having a greater contact patch with the tarmac is going to give you more grip. And this is the reason that a lot of people recommend that you use a lower pressure, including myself, recommend that you use a lower pressure in your tyres when you are riding in the wet, because it's going to give you more grip. Now, this will, in some cases, come at the expense of kind of rolling resistance and performance, but let's be honest, staying upright, staying rubber side down, is far more important than trying to ensure that you are having the optimal rolling resistance, because if you go into a corner a bit too hot and you have a spill, even if you are virtually unscathed, if you got away with it, if you were lucky, you just skidded well across the road, and you get up on the bike and you start riding again, you just kind of got a couple of grazes, then the time that you lose from hitting the deck is going to undo any real benefit you could have got from improved rolling resistance, plus the fact that you've now got a few minor injuries to show for it. So it is worth running slightly lower tyre pressures than normal. And on tyre pressures, it's these days a lot of people are talking about running low tyre pressures rather than running high. And you should certainly never be running tyres at the maximum allowed level of pressure unless you are riding on roads that are sort of glassy smooth or a velodrome or something like that. You might also want to look at some more kind of all-weather tyres, such as the Continental Four Seasons or the Specialized Roubaix. Tyres that are more hard-wearing, they have a slightly better level of puncture resistance. The rubber is supposed to be better at handling grip in cooler temperatures, so they're designed to be ridden in poor weather rather than the top end tyres, which are designed to be ridden at events like the Tour de France, where the temperature's normally relatively high and it's all about optimal performance. These are heavier, these are more puncture resistant, but they have better grip, especially in the wet. So that is definitely something that I would look at doing, again, if you are going to be doing a considerable amount of riding outside. You also need to be looking at mud guards, I'd probably recommend. Now, there are two main types of mud guard that you can get. Actually, three types of mud guard. So the first one is an arse saver. And this is a mud guard that sits behind your saddle, and the idea is that it will catch the majority of spray, water spray, that comes off of your back wheel and will stop it from coating your arse. It keeps your arse dry. And these are very cheap. You often get them given away at events for free. They're just a little bit of sort of plastic that you fold in the right way, stick it under your saddle, nice dry bum. The second option you have is clip-on mud guards, where these are the mud guards that I generally recommend for triathletes, where you clip them onto the frame and they have sort of a special mounting kit, and these provide a much better coverage. So the mud guard will go right over the rear wheel. Rather than just sort of protecting being next to your bum and keeping that dry, it protects the whole wheel. It really reduces the spray from being kicked up at all. And you also have one over your front wheel that protects the sort of your down tube from getting sprayed, and your legs as well, by water off of the front wheel. Now, the downside with clip-on mud guards is that getting them fitted correctly so there's no rubbing on the tyre or the wheel and that they're the right spacing, it can be a little bit of a fiddle. It's worth doing because they provide much greater protection than simply the bit of plastic that sits behind your saddle. But the other option is fully mounted mud guards, and these are only really suitable for bikes that have mud guard mounts on them. And chances are, if you bought a road bike in the last sort of 10 years, it's not going to have mud guard mounts on it. There could be some exceptions, but the vast majority of bikes, I mean, generally speaking, it's touring bikes that would tend to have mud guard mounts on them these days. They're not going to have mounting points for mud guards, so these full mud guards are probably not going to be an option. Now, it's great because if you can mount the mud guard directly to the frame, they're not going to slip. However, this is something that it's just not a reality for most athletes. But again, that could be another reason to get a winter bike if you really wanted one. Touching on other bikes, actually. Gravel bikes are owned by a number of triathletes, especially in North America, I believe, where there are a lot of roads that are suitable for gravel riding, and it's much more appealing to ride on these fire roads that are sort of across the country rather than to ride on the roads themselves because there's no cars. And yeah, I'm not going to argue that, but if you are taking a gravel bike out and using it sort of as a winter bike, and there's nothing really wrong with that, just be mindful that the tyres aren't going to have as much grip on the road as road tyres would. Now, you can understand, I know that I had sort of an ongoing sort of back and forth with my mum for a couple of years where she swore that she had better grip and she felt more confident on her gravel tyres on the road, rather than in poor conditions at least, rather than her road tyres. I kept saying to her, no, it's the size of the contact patch, it's the amount of rubber that is in contact with the road, and that is what is going to make sure that, that's what's going to dictate how much grip it is that you have. Whereas if you have a gravel tyre, then only part of that, a much smaller percentage of that tyre is going to be in contact with the road at any one time, which is what you want when you're riding off-road. But if you are going around corners at speed, on the road, then that is going to provide you with less grip. And she swore, no, but I feel so much more stable, so much better on that bike. And it was only actually when we went to a bike shop and she and the members of staff there agreed with me that we finally managed to put it to rest. But the reason that she felt better on those gravel tyres is because they're wider. Gravel tyres will nearly always be wider than road tyres, and it's by having that wider, more stable footing, it makes you feel like you are better planted, which I suppose you are in some respects. But when it comes to going round a corner, when you're looking at having sort of a corner in the wet, then having more rubber in contact with the road, so that's having a road tyre that is, slightly lower pressure to give you more contact, that is your best chance of staying upright. Now, sort of fans of Formula One may think to themselves, yeah, but if you look at Formula One, then the slicks are the tyres they're using, the dry, and the wet tyres, they're the ones with the grooves in. So why is that? Well, the reason that you have the grooves in the wet tyres is because they're looking to dispel water. The amount of water that you look at the size of a Formula One tyre, the amount of water they will pick up, especially going at the speeds that they are, those tyres, their job is to disperse the water to gain as much grip as possible. When you look at the contact patch of a bike tyre, relative to how wide a Formula One tyre is, you can see it's completely different because the contact patch is so narrow with a bike tyre. So if you are looking for the most grip possible in wet weather, then going for a solid road tyre is going to be your best bet rather than going for a gravel tyre. Next up, let's look at what we're going to wear. Now, one of the reasons that people are reluctant to ride in poor conditions, and you know what, I can't say I blame them, is because of the amount of money that you need to invest in getting clothing to allow you to ride outdoors. You can't just hop out in your bib shorts and your short sleeve jersey and go out for a ride in poor weather. It's just not going to work. You are going to end up frozen, you're going to risk getting hypothermic, your performance is going to fall off of a cliff. So you do need to invest in some more kit. But this investment, at least for some of it, is going to be really, really critical, because without it, you could get to race day and you could need some of this kit. So I really recommend that you invest in it. I'm going to talk you through from kit that you're most likely to need, kit that you're going to want to look at getting first, and then we're going to go further down the list until we get to sort of full winter kit. A fantastic piece of kit that I think I wear over my tri-suit at a good kind of like 25% of races that I do is a gilet. Now this is a sleeveless sort of vest that zips up, and you wear this over your tri-suit if you're racing, or over your jersey if you're riding outdoors, and this acts as a sort of windproof normally barrier. So it keeps the wind off of your chest. Now, if you are riding in strong winds, then the wind is going to go straight through your jersey and it's going to chill you. And by having this windproof layer over your core, over your torso, this really helps keep your body temperature high and stops you from getting too cold. It just makes the experience a lot more pleasant. And quite often, if a triathlon is early in the morning and the air temperature is quite low, I will stick a gilet on, and you have to keep in mind, especially over like a middle distance, I'm going to be out on the bike. Most people average of about 3 hours, somewhere between 3.5 hours. I'm going to be out there for this amount of time, and I need to make sure that I am going to be comfortable at the start of the bike as well as at the end of the bike. If you head out and it's really cold, but the sun comes out later, you could find that any extra layers, they become a little bit sort of too hot. Now, what you can do is, if you're riding and you start really cooking, if you start really overheating, is you can remove a layer and you can hand it to a marshal and ask them to run it back to Race HQ. And hopefully by the time that you finish your event, the bike course will be closed, or at least starting to get towards the point of being closed, and your extra layer should have been run back to Race HQ we can hopefully collect it from the sort of the race organisers. Now, again, I'd say there's never more than a kind of an 80-90% chance of you ever seeing the item again. In most cases, marshals will try really hard to make sure they get it back to you. If you have the time to tell them your race number, then that will really help. But if you are sort of working really hard and you've already taken the gilet off and you just want to be able to chuck it at a marshal and say, can you run that back for me? There is always the risk that it's not going to make its way back there for one reason or another. But in most cases, it will. That's a good way to look at it. Some tri-suits have pockets, and a gilet, if you have one that is a really that packs up really tightly, and you might actually be able to fit it inside some larger triathlon suit pockets, then that's an option as well. It could also be that some people have sort of storage on their tri-bike where they can place bits. It could be that you have a storage compartment that is large enough to jam a gilet in. It's unlikely, but you never know. Some people, they might have a fake, well, not a fake, but instead of having a bottle on their frame, they might have an empty canister, and it could be that if you know you can fit your gilet inside the canister, that you ride that. Or you could put tools in there, whatever it is, but that's another option for taking it off. Or if you know that it's going to be rainy all day, you probably say to yourself, you know what, I think I probably need to wear this. Now, the next thing you want to look at is gloves. Because if you are going to be riding in cold weather, your hands are going to get cold. And if your hands get cold, if you're unable to use the brakes, this is going to vastly increase the risk of you crashing. It's going to really sort of affect your confidence of being able to go round corners because you're unsure if you're going to be able to stop. And so you may end up braking a lot earlier, a lot harder than you need to because you haven't got the control over your hands. And it's also just really unpleasant to ride along with cold hands. So you want to be looking at some gloves. Now, for the most part, especially if these are sort of gloves for race day, then you want to make sure that they're thin gloves because you're just looking to keep the worst of the chill and the wind off of your hands. There are much thicker gloves that you can use that are perfect for going out on those really cold days or those really wet days. Some people can even pair these gloves with a pair of sort of nitrite gloves, something that will add a real kind of genuinely waterproof and windproof layer, because no matter how waterproof a pair of gloves make themselves out to be. I mean, I've had some sealskins gloves that have had this fantastic sort of plastic layer in them to keep the water out. You are still going to get water that runs down your arm and into your glove. There's no way of getting around this. But if you can have these nitrite gloves as well that you can wear underneath the gloves on really cold rides, that can be a big help. But putting gloves onto wet hands once you come out the swim, it does take time, if I'm honest. It is something that is going to be a bit of a struggle. But you see, pros will do it. Even athletes for whom it is their job to ride as fast as they can, they know that if they spend sort of 15-20 seconds fighting with gloves in transition, that is going to save them a lot of time over the event, because they will be able to they'll get that time back because they'll be able to brake more confidently, they'll be able to steer more confidently. It really is a case, same with the gilet, it really is a case of making sure that you think ahead. And a lot of people, when they come through T1, they'll be in a real rush. They'll have their heart rate would be probably the highest it's going to be for the entire event. They're going to be, not in the position to make great choices. And it's very easy in this case to make a stupid decision. Now, if we are taking on a sprint distance or an Olympic distance, then transitions are all the more important. Any decision you probably won't need to live with for much more than sort of 90 minutes for most athletes when you're out on that bike. However, if you're taking on a half or a full Ironman, if you want to blaze through transition, you think, I'm not going to bother. I know I've bought the gilet. I know I told myself I was going to put it on, but I want to get on the bike as soon as I can. You're going to have to live with that decision for 112 miles. And I've met plenty of people at the hotels or Ironman events that I've been to as an athlete and also as a supporter, who talk the next day. You see them down at breakfast and they tell they had to pull out because they got hypothermia. And it's happened to one of my athletes. I've told the story on the podcast before. He was an older gentleman. I think he was in his sort of mid-70s at the time. I kept saying to him, make sure you put on an extra layer, make sure you put on extra clothing, because the older we get, the more prone we are to the cold. It was a race in September, and I kept saying it, and he had to pull out of the race because he didn't put an extra layer on. And it's just gutting, when you put all this effort in and you have this, your head is in the position, got to go fast, got to race, got to blaze through transition. But yeah, people leave behind gloves and jerseys and extra layers and all these bits that they told them they put on in the heat of the moment. Then they have to live with that decision for hours on end, which can make it really miserable. Moving on from gloves, slightly higher up the arms, we have arm warmers. And no, these aren't 80s fashion accessories. They are sort of quite tight-fitting, generally sort of made of lycra, sometimes with a sort of a softer lining. And these are sleeves which you roll onto your arms, and they have sort of different lengths, different thicknesses. But the idea is that they cover your arms, so that as you're riding along, you don't have that wind chill on your arms and don't get nearly as cold. These are quite popular, even with professional athletes at colder races. I think that as the triathlon calendar expands, as the sport, does continue to grow, then they have a lot of races which are spread out all over the year. And there are more events, even sort of championship events now, where the air temperature really is quite low. I believe, I'm trying to remember what it was St George. No, it was more recent than that. Oh no, it could have been St George 70.3 Worlds. I think that Holly Lawrence, professional athlete, went out and she sort of rushed through transition, didn't put anything on, and she had a horrible time out there. Even though she was only out on the bike for about 2 hours, because she's a very good professional athlete. All these other athletes, they all kind of wrapped up, got themselves warm. She didn't. She just sort of went straight out in a tri-suit and lived to regret that. But yeah, lots of professional athletes, even those who, it's for them, it really is of utmost importance. They will take the time to put arm warmers on wet, cold arms, because they know that it's only going to get worse as they're riding. These are a really good option, especially if you suffer with cold arms. Yes, it can take a lot of time. It can, you can definitely lose time in transition. I'd recommend, if you're planning to use some arm warmers, that you also take a towel into transition, so you can dry your arms off and make it a lot easier to roll those arm warmers on. And they are a really good option. They're really lightweight, and they can absolutely be stuck in a pocket once you finish with them, because they're very small. They wrap up really nice. So yeah, arm warmers are a definite win for race day, and they're also great for training. If it is a day where it's definitely a little bit nippy when I head out, but you know what, it's probably going to get warmer throughout the day. A lot of the time, I'll head out with a gilet and a pair of arm warmers, and I can then remove those as needs be. Now, when I'm training, I've got my cycle jersey on, I've got my big pockets. Those slide in really easy, really nicely. So yeah, these are absolutely the way to go, these arm warmers. If you're looking for some flexibility, ways to keep yourself warm. Of course, they don't keep your core warm, but it's up to you. It's up to where it is that you feel the cold. Continuing to move up the body, we have Buffs, which I think that Buff actually is a brand as opposed to an item of clothing, but it's one of those terms that has just been coined, and it's a loop of material that's quite like a long tube of fabric. And the idea is that you pull these over your head, and there are lots of other things that you can do with them as well. But most people to pull them over their head, and they will help keep the gap between the neck and the rest of their clothing a lot more sort of closed. It's just like wearing a scarf basically, but it's very lightweight, and it is designed for people who are participating in sort of physical activity. Now, if it's race day, I don't think there's really a place for these unless you're wearing an extra layer over the top, of which it would have to be quite a cold day, or you'd have to be the kind of athlete who really feels the cold to want to be looking at something like that. And yeah, so I would look into these as a great addition to have to your wardrobe. Again, they're really lightweight, so they can be stuffed into a pocket when you no longer need them. There are tons of these. Again, they're often branded and given out free at events and the like, so definitely look into these, and they're also useful just, when out walking the dog, and or just going about your day when it's outside, when it's nippy. You don't want a full scarf, you just want something to take the edge off the wind and stop that wind from going down your top. I guess we're going to have to address the subject of socks sooner or later, aren't we? So whether you use socks or not in triathlon really is completely up to you. I find that when I do shorter events, sprint and Olympic, I don't. Unless, sometimes if I know it's going to be very wet out there and I know there's a good chance that my feet are going to get blistered, then I might put some socks on to prevent myself against that, especially on the run. Whereas on the bike, maybe not. But if it is cold, a lot of triathlon shoes, if you're using a specific triathlon shoe or just a lot of road shoes, they'll have quite a considerable venting on the shoe. The idea being that a lot of triathlons do take place in very warm climates. However, if you are competing in a cold climate, then you don't want that cold air to be coming through these large vents in your shoes. The material, the webbing also tends to be lighter than on road shoes as well, so you might even want to consider using road shoes rather than specific triathlon shoes that you have in this eventuality. Again, it will take you an extra kind of 5-10 seconds to get road shoes on and all ratcheted up, and you'll have to run in the road shoes to the mountain line. But especially if you're taking on a longer event, it's a price worth paying so that you have feet that you actually have feeling in when you come off the bike. That is quite important, I find. I have had it before where I have run on very cold feet and they just feel like blocks of ice, and it makes you so slow because you just don't have that connection with the ground. It's a really unpleasant experience. So yeah, definitely consider road shoes. However, socks are a decent go-between. You can practice with these in training. Head out for one day in your tri shoes with a pair of socks in slightly colder temperatures. See how it feels. Is it manageable at that kind of temperature on race day? You can typically look at an event, see where it is, and if you can look at historical weather forecasts, and you can see what the air temperature generally is around about the kind of time that you'd be starting the bike, and use that as information to inform your decisions on what it is that you're going to wear. I wouldn't necessarily recommend for going sort of really thick socks in many situations. Again, nothing saying that you can't if you feel the cold, but sometimes just having some cycling socks there to be able to protect your feet against the worst of sort of any drafts coming through your triathlon shoe or your road shoe, it can just really make a difference. Stop your toes from going too numb. Hopefully, as you warm up throughout the day, that effect should dissipate to an extent, but still, it's just a really good idea to make sure that you have a plan in place and that you don't end up with no feeling in your feet, because that really is rotten and that will cost you a lot of time between the bike and the run. I'm also going to touch on overshoes. Now, these are shoes that, well, not overshoes at all, are they? They are covers for your shoes. Some people call them shoe covers, but the idea is that you slip your shoes into them and you then zip them up, or in some cases, sort of velo toes, which are more for aerodynamics. The idea would be that you would, it takes a long time to get them on because they are sort of a one piece of, I'm trying to, sort of rubber almost, I think they're made of. I can't remember what velo toes are made of. I've never used them, but I used to sell them at the bike shop. And but you stick them on, and the idea is that they provide a layer, a barrier to the rain and to the wind. And they do a pretty good job. And for training, if the temperature is sort of 10 degrees or lower, yeah, you better put my overshoes on. For race day, I struggle to see that they would be worth it in all but sort of the coldest of temperatures. Now, again, you can get some overshoes which are designed more for streamlining, more for aerodynamics. And I remember when I was at the 70.3 World Championships chatting to another athlete, and he was talking about, when I always put my overshoes on in transition because I know it takes time, but I know what I've read, I've seen the data, I know that it's worth it. And I sort of thought to myself, well, I think that, whilst we shouldn't use professional athletes as a gauge of whether it's worth it or not, if it really did pay off, if it really did make us faster, I think we'd be seeing more top-level athletes do it, but we don't. And I think the reason for that is, that the aerodynamic gains that a pair of sort of more aerodynamic, I guess, for want of a better term, performance overshoes, let's call them performance overshoes, for the benefit they offer, I think that if you were riding on a very sort of flat course, very little wind, that yeah, it could be that will work out. But the drag data that they get for how much sort of power and time these shoes save you, it will have come from a wind tunnel. And we don't live in a perfect world. We don't. You're not riding and racing in a wind tunnel. You're racing on the road. And I think with the hills, with different angles of wind, with all of these different factors, it's just it. I'm not sold on it personally. I don't think it is necessarily a very good idea. But you know, if you genuinely believe they make them faster, then you do you. While we're talking about feet, let's touch on legs as well. You can get leg warmers and you can get knee warmers, which are sort of the equivalent of knee warmers for your knees or your legs. You won't be surprised to hear. Leg warmers are great because they allow you to sort of turn a pair of shorts into sort of a budget pair of cycling tights. If you aren't really doing much riding outside, if you can't justify buying an entirely new pair of clothing item for the very odd occasion if you're riding out in cold weather, getting some leg warmers can be a really good way around this. And the great thing with leg warmers is you can whip them off mid-ride. It doesn't involve taking your shoe off, I will admit, but you can take them off mid-ride, preferably when you're not actually cycling. Stick them in your jersey pocket and you'll be absolutely golden. Knee warmers are similar, but they only come down to just below your knee. Again, they can be really nice in the spring or the autumn, where it can start off quite crisp first thing, but it warms up throughout the day. And with knee warmers, you can adjust them as well. You can pull them further up if you want less coverage, or drop them down a bit lower if you want a little bit more warmth. They are great. I have a pair myself. I definitely wouldn't say they're an essential, but for a number of triathletes who probably won't want to go out and buy a pair of bib tights, I think that a pair of leg warmers is a really good idea. But either leg warmers or knee warmers, I struggle to see a place for them on race day for most athletes. Maybe knee warmers at a push. Another piece of cycling gear for riding in cold conditions is the cycling cap. Now this sits underneath your helmet and it keeps you warm. Now, these are a bit contentious in certain sort of circumstances. Some people really hate the way they look. Some people don't like the way that you have the peak that will sort of restrict your vision a little bit. You can flip the cap up, but it then doesn't keep the sort of the rain out your eyes in the same way. But the main benefit is that you will, by putting this cap on, you have this layer between your head and the air, and it just helps retain heat. How many times has somebody, you've gone out and when you're younger, your mum tells you to wear a hat so you don't get too cold. There is mileage in this, and especially when you're cycling, when you're not actually you're moving very fast, you're getting all of that wind resistance, but it's only your legs that are moving. We do really get quite cold on the bike sometimes. So I think a cycling cap is a great thing to wear, to be able to help just give you another layer of defence against this this chill in the air that we're trying to avoid, but definitely not one for race day. Now we've gone over accessories. I want to have a look at other different types of clothing you can get, because if you have a cycle jersey for training in, chances are that most people, the first one they'll start riding in the warmer weather and they'll grab themselves a short sleeve jersey, and it will be relatively breathable one for riding in hot weather. But as soon as the wind picks up, as soon as the sun goes in, as soon as the temperatures drop, this does start to really have its limits. You can get some short sleeve jerseys. That shouldn't be a tongue twister. You can get some short sleeve jerseys that are more lightweight than others. But if you are going to be riding in chillier conditions, I really recommend that you get a weatherproof jersey. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, I mean a item such as the Castelli Gabba. It is a jersey made out of windproof material, and it's also water resistant. So if you're heading out and the wind is blowing, that wind just bounces off of your jersey, so you don't have that that chill go through your bones when you get hit a gust of wind. It also shrugs off light rain and showers. When you're looking at persistent rainfall, then that will go straight through that. It's not going to provide you long-term protection. But any waterproof equipment on the bike is going to give up sooner or later anyway. But the weatherproof jersey, these are just fantastic pieces of equipment. They are brilliant for riding in mild days in winter, as well as all the way through the spring, all the way through the autumn. Okay, these are brilliant. I cannot recommend them enough. The Castelli Gabba is the one that I use. It may just be the best bit of triathlon kit that I own. It allows me to get out in a wide variety of weathers, and it keeps me toasty warm. If you pair up a weatherproof jersey with arm warmers, you are laughing in most conditions. You can whip the arm warmers off when it starts to get a bit warm. Most of the weatherproof jerseys, they tend to be a little bit scratchy, the material on the inside, so you'd want to wear a sort of a thermal layer underneath, which I'll go into in a moment. But maybe not even thermal, maybe it could just be a light base layer. But you want something between your skin and that jersey, I'm going to wager. But yeah, they are brilliant. They often have sort of reflective details on them, or they're being colours which pop when you are at night. These are just brilliant pieces of equipment. They're not always cheap, but if you are going to be cycling in all weathers, if you really want to enjoy being a cyclist rather than just riding your bike for the sake of a triathlon, then I cannot recommend you get one of these enough. Touching on base layers while I remember, these are layers that go underneath your jersey, and you get them in short sleeve, you can get them in no sleeve, you can get them in long sleeve. They have different layers of thermal insulation, and these are an absolutely fantastic way to keep yourself warm. Now, if you are doing a harder ride, where you know that you're going to work up a bit more of a sweat, depending on the other layers of clothing that you're wearing, you may not always want to go for a thermal base layer. As I mentioned earlier, you can get light base layers, which you can wear all year round, the idea being that it will wick the sweat. And I've been told that wearing a extremely lightweight base layer that wicks the sweat away can actually keep you cooler in the hot weather than just riding with a straight jersey. I've tried it. I bought one of those base layers. I'm not sure I noticed a massive difference personally, but then I do think my volume of sweat is probably lower than some other athletes, so maybe it works a lot better for them. But it's worth considering, if you're doing a lot of riding in bad weather, getting yourself a good thermal base layer. The downside to them is that you can't really remove them mid-ride, so the decision you make when you're putting your base layer on, you do have to live by that. Sticking with the upper body, sort of a step up from the weatherproof jersey, is a long sleeve jersey. And this, in some respects, it's quite a different piece of kit. It's not weatherproofed in the same way, but it is long sleeve, and they will sometimes be fleece lined. I used to have one which wasn't fleece lined, which I gave away because I didn't like it. I didn't get on with it. It was essentially broadly the same kind of material as you get on a short sleeve jersey, but it was long sleeve. But there were very few rides where you felt it was cold enough to warrant needing longer sleeves, but it was warm enough that the sort of the blowing wind cutting straight through that jersey wouldn't be much of an issue. I think if you walk with a base layer, then it could work, but I didn't get on with it. I do have one long sleeve jersey that I wear that is nice and fleece lined, which I will wear, but only really on very still, cold days. Because if there's going to be wind, if there's a little bit of wind, that's fine. It doesn't really cut through. But if it's going to be blowing, I'm going to be wanting to wear my weatherproof jersey. So it's a bit of a niche object there. I don't really think that many triathletes really need to own a long sleeve jersey, unless you are, in the kind of conditions where you feel that would be beneficial. The next step up from a long sleeve jersey is a cycling jacket. Now, a cycling jacket, it goes over your jersey or anything else that you're wearing, and it's a really thick, warm layer. These are designed for wearing when the temperatures really are towards the bottom end of the single digits in Celsius temperature-wise. Anything much over kind of 6-7 degrees, I think I'd probably be too hot in mine. But they are great if you are heading out on a day with no risk of ice, and you just want to keep warm. They can be unzipped partially. A lot of them have pockets, like the one that I've got. It has little zippers on the side that you can open up to allow a bit more airflow. If you are riding in colder temperatures, if you are riding on, I know that some parts of the world They have, where it's very cold, they have bike lanes that are ploughed on a regular basis to allow people to still get to work by bike. A cycling jacket would be the perfect piece of equipment for taking on something like that, where you know that it's going to be sort of a good quality surface, it's cold, but you want to stay warm. Speaking of thermal equipment, I'm going to touch on bib tights. Now, these are the ultimate in comfort and warmth. Leg warmers, they're great, they really are, but there is nothing that is quite as warm and comforting as setting out in a pair of tights in the cold weather. Okay, they just hit differently. Yes, you do have to make that extra expenditure. No, you probably don't need more than one pair as a triathlete. These are, fantastic pieces of equipment that will keep you really warm. Of course, unlike leg warmers, you can't really remove them as it starts to warm up, but also you don't have to worry about them slipping down as you ride either, which can be an issue, especially with knee warmers. So I would absolutely recommend that somebody who's serious about riding in bad weather does look at getting themselves a pair of tights. This is a pretty good time of year, February, when I'm recording this. It's a pretty good time of year to go out buying bib tights because they are going to be cheap. They're going to be getting rid of this year's stock because not many people are going to buy them. And the final piece of equipment I wanted to cover today was the waterproof jacket. Now, the waterproof jacket is, it can be a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, it can be really nice to keep, relatively decent rain off of you, keep you dry. At least your torso, your legs are a bit of a different story, as well as your head and all that, but it does take a genius to work that out. But to keep your arms and your torso free of rain is really nice. It's a nice luxury to have. On the other hand, a lot of cycling waterproofs, you're going to get very hot very quickly in them. In fact, they call them boil-in-a-bag jerseys. Because for them to be waterproof, they have to be relatively tight-fitting, and they have to be, quite literally, waterproof. And if water cannot get in from the rain, then then you're going to sweat an awful lot more because that material isn't going to be very permeable at all. So you're going to get sweaty when you're riding with a waterproof jacket, and that is going to result in the waterproof jacket sort of sticking to your skin as it sticks to the sweat. It can be quite unpleasant. Now, in colder conditions, this is still a no-brainer. But if it is hot weather, sort of hotter weather, but it is still raining, I normally would swerve the waterproof jacket in all but the worst of rain showers, really, because you just get so hot riding in them. Now, there are some very nice, very expensive cycling waterproofs that have come onto the market in recent years. And you can pay £250, something like that, for a waterproof that is going to be quite breathable and very waterproof. It is a bit of a miracle product. I've not ridden with myself, but I've heard, good things from people who have ridden with them. However, that's an awful lot of money to be dropping on a waterproof jacket you're probably not going to be riding with an awful amount. So I would, if you have the money, then definitely go for it. If you do a lot of riding, go for it, especially if it's with a cycling club and you're going to be heading out in all weathers. But for most triathletes, you kind of need to get them out of the house with a crowbar a little bit into the cold weather. It's probably not money well spent unless the rain is a massive, keeping yourself warm in the rain is a massive barrier to you getting out. There's definitely no place for it on race day. You are just going to overheat. If it is raining on race day, you just need to suck it up and get wet. The final piece of equipment I wanted to cover, because I've just remembered about it, are winter cycling shoes. Now, these are shoes that you can wear or you can buy that are designed purely for winter cycling. And they are very thick, they're very waterproof, they are designed for the job. I think for most triathletes, these are overkill, if I'm honest, unless you live in maybe if you live somewhere like Canada, where there is going to be, you're going to be riding in cold conditions for large quantities of the year, if not the majority of the year, there could be mileage in that. But yeah, considering that most triathletes, they're not going to be doing much riding in cold weather at all, you're not going to be wanting to look at them, and definitely don't look at them for race day, because something that's waterproof isn't going to be breathable and your feet are going to get way too hot. So hopefully you now have an idea of what it is that you need to buy sort of equipment wise to be able to help you ride in bad weather. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that expecting a triathlete, especially somebody in the first year or so of training, to go out and to buy all that equipment is unreasonable. I think that if you just get yourself, a pair of arm warmers, you get yourself some thicker socks maybe, a gilet, a cycling cap, that this may, depending on the sort of the kind of temperatures you're planning to ride in, this may do it itself. Now, I have got a full wardrobe of cycling kit. Now, that's because when I started the sport, turbo training wasn't so much a thing. It was much more expensive, and I didn't have the space for a trainer. So if I wanted to get any bike miles done in the winter, I had to head out. Things are very different now. Turbo training is almost compulsory now for triathletes who want to be able to to train properly all year round. And I'm a big fan of turbo training. Don't get me wrong. As much as I may be trying to encourage people to get out and to train in the bad weather, turbo training is essential at certain points, if only for an efficiency sort of point, but it is something that you do want to make sure that you get some experience of riding outside for reasons I've gone over already. I won't repeat myself. Next up, if we are riding in the rain, which is the weather condition you're probably most likely to come across on race day that's really going to throw you. How is it that you ride differently in the rain relative to the dry? Well, as I've already touched on, if you run your tyre pressures slightly lower, this can help you get a bit more of a contact patch. Again, we're not talking much, like 5-10 psi, something like that max. Give you a slightly bigger contact patch that will reduce the risk of you being able to sort of slide out in corners. And when you start riding in the rain, you want to build up your confidence slowly. Okay, you really want to make sure that you're taking corners progressively a little bit faster. But when you start out, really do take it easy around the corners. I mean, whenever you go around a corner in the rain, you want to be keeping the bike upright. You don't want to be leaning into the corner like you might do if you're taking a corner fast in the dry. You want to keep the bike upright. You want to take a sort of a wider line around that corner. You want to take more of sort of a racing line than you perhaps would otherwise. So you're putting less load on the tyre. And, you probably want to start braking a little bit earlier into that corner than you normally would to make sure that you slow down enough. Now, if you run disc brakes, and chances are if you're riding a bike in 2026, I'm going to say there's a good sort of 70% chance that you're riding disc brakes. You don't need to worry about this as much. You just want to make sure that you're in appropriate speed when you reach the corner. If you're riding on rim brakes, however, you are going to want to make sure that you are notably slowing sooner, because rim brakes, they just don't work as well in the wet, and so you need to start your braking a little bit sooner. When the ground is wet, you really want to avoid any kind of metal, so sort of drain covers are the main culprit here. Just manhole covers as well. You really want to avoid this if you can. And if you notice last minute that you are approaching one of these and there's no way around it, just focus on keeping your handlebars straight and keep going. Okay, it's not ideal. There is a chance when you go over these metal grids that even if you are doing absolutely nothing wrong, that your bike could just disappear out from underneath you. It's just a risk that you run when you're having to ride in the wet. Again, like riding around cities in the wet is probably a bit more hazardous for that respect. There's more changes of direction, more corners, more bits of street furniture to navigate. In the countryside, you don't have to worry about it as much, but in the countryside, there are more in the way of potholes. And if there's been a period of sustained rain, then you are going to end up with some small floods especially on country roads. But again, not unheard of in cities either. And cycling through floods, it's not really advisable, but sometimes you have to do it. You've got to get on with it, because especially if you are only a couple miles from home, you're trying to finish a loop and you realise you come up to this big flood and you go, oh yeah, I'm in trouble here, aren't I? Now, the reason that we recommend against cycling through floods is that you can't see what's underneath you. So there could be a big pothole, for instance, or there could be a drain cover. So if you do have to cycle through a flood, if you've got no choice, or if you know the road well and you know that there isn't a pothole there, then try to just, where possible, cycle along the middle of the road. so on the crown of the road, because most roads, most parts of the world, the middle of the road will be ever so slightly higher than the curbside to allow water to flow off and to run down. So if you're cycling on that bit there, not only are you less likely to have potholes slap bang in the middle of the road, it's also going to be that little bit higher, which means that you should have some slightly improved visibility as you ride through. On the subject of riding through floods, I have a cautionary tale for you all. Now, where a younger, stupider version of myself decided to go out for a ride in the middle of winter. It's not a stupid idea in itself, but what I did next was stupid. Because I went out and I rode through a flood. And as I rode through this flood, which, I knew the road, I knew it wasn't going to be dangerous, it got deeper and deeper and deeper, and I didn't realise how deep it was. And in the end, my feet ended up partially submerged. And this was within the first sort of 15 minutes of the ride. And I thought, bugger, that's not what I wanted. But you know what? I'm going to push on and continue my ride. Massive mistake. Because as my feet got soaking wet, they never warmed up. They didn't have a chance to warm up. The air temperature, I'm guessing, would have been around about like 3 or 4 degrees. And as I cycled along, the further I went, the colder and colder that my feet got. And it got to the point where I couldn't feel them. I just felt that it was my thighs, and I was just, using the muscles in my legs to go up, down, up, down, up, down, and desperately tried to get home. I had to cut everything short, went back home, had to go through that flood again to get back home, and at the time I was visiting my parents for Christmas, and I got back to my parents' house, and I had to ring them up and say, look, you're going to need to come outside and help me, because I haven't got the strength in my feet to be able to unclip from my pedals. And I remember being sat there in my parents' kitchen, and they gave me a sort of a bowl of very, very lukewarm water for me to put my feet in that felt like it was lava. And yeah, just if you end up with wet feet, turn around, go home as fast as you can, because you are going to have a miserable ride. The same goes for any other part of you, I guess, that ends up wet, or if you find yourself in any way in sort of great uncomfortability. That's not a word, I just came up with it. If you find yourself really uncomfortable, turn around, go home, because it's only going to get worse the further that you cycle in those kind of conditions. So I think I've covered, when it comes to the cold and when it comes to the rain, I think I've covered an awful lot there. These are conditions which you may encounter on race day, but it's less likely in most cases. Again, it's never a guarantee. If you're worried about sort of rain at your event, you wonder what the chances are. If you put into your race, so taking it as an example, if I put in Ironman Wales rain into Google and you see what posts come up, you'd see that people routinely talk about all of the editions. 2017, I think, was pretty miserable. And there was one 2 or 3 years ago, I think, where it really rained all day. And you would go, okay, so there is a high chance at this event there's going to be a lot of rain. And let's look at the course profile. Oh, it's really hilly. I'm going to need to get lots of rides in all terrains, in all weathers, to make sure I'm ready for that race. If you have somebody who turns up to the start line of Ironman Wales, who's just ridden on the turbo trainer, and has never ridden in the rain before, they're going to have a miserable day. In fact, you know what? They're probably not going to finish, if I'm being brutally honest. You need to get the experience in on these kinds of roads to be able to prepare you for that. But if you look for a race, Ironman Vichy perhaps, that's in the summer, in a very sort of warm part of the world, Ironman Vichy rain, and you may have no real results come up, you may go, oh, sounds like it's been dry every single edition, so I don't have to worry so much. What you are very likely to come across on race day, however, is wind. Now, wind is really hard to get away from when you're riding your bike, especially if you're doing a loop that's 112 miles. If you're doing a full Ironman, but even shorter events, it's quite likely you're going to get some. If it's anywhere coastal, or even if it's anywhere really flat. Now, flat courses, they tend to be much faster than hillier courses. But where you have lots of flat lands, you tend to have a lot more wind. You have stronger wind, and sometimes that can be gusting wind. And that is a real problem. So there's not an awful lot that we can do to beat the wind, if I'm being brutally honest. It is something that you just need to master, you need to spend time with to get used to it. Again, if you are riding a time trial bike and you've bought yourself some expensive wheels, those deep wheels are going to act like a sail if they get hit by a gust of wind from the side, and they're going to blow you across the road. If you have done very little riding outside because you wanted to protect your race bike, or you didn't want to ride your expensive wheels outside, you are going to end up having no idea how to manage this, and chances are you're going to have to end up riding really slowly on the bull horns, not in the aero position, because you're trying to wrestle your bike. Meanwhile, you're getting overtaken by people on road bikes who are confident riding in the wind. This is a disaster scenario for somebody who's clearly put so much sort of time, energy, money and effort into this event, to find themselves, being overtaken by people who are less fit than them on bikes that are, a lot heavier, a lot less expensive than theirs. It's not good for the ego, and this is the kind of experience that can make somebody rage quit from the sport. Now, it is worth going out and practicing riding in the wind to an extent. Now, if it is a bit blowy out there, this is a good chance. Head out on your road bike, get used to riding in the wind. If there is a weather warning at the number of wind, if there is strong gusts, okay, that is not where you want to start your journey of riding in the wind. I don't want you to head out on your race bike in that wind and go, great, Simon says I need to practice riding in strong winds on my race bike in case it's windy on race day, because you'll probably end up in a ditch. So it really is important that you start off on your road bike and you just get used to riding that, not in the aero position, you have a clip-on aero bars, just in the normal position, and you get used to riding in the wind. Now, there's gusts and there's headwinds, there's all of these that we need to contend with. Gusts are scary. Gusts are one of the few things that they really do frighten me as an athlete, if I'm honest. I'm a lighter athlete, and a strong gust from the side can notably blow me across the road. So if I'm riding and there is a gust that is looking to blow me, into either the side of the road or into traffic, then I will try to ride in a position on the road that would give me the maximum amount of time to be able to correct that. Now, a little tip for you is that if you are riding the countryside and it is windy, don't listen to music. Now, listening to music on the bike can be a little bit contentious, but I've done it enough over the years that I'm not going to throw shade at people who do. I've not done it for many years, but I definitely did it when I was younger. One headphone in for the most part. But if you're riding in the wind, you need to keep all your senses about you. Because if you hear a rustle of the trees, you know a gust is coming. And when you know a gust is coming, that is the perfect opportunity for you to position yourself on the road in a position that will allow you to correct for that, and to be able to anticipate that, and with your handling of the bike, be able to lean into that, to expect that. If a gust is coming from the left, that you will lean ever so slightly and turn ever so slightly to your left to avoid yourself being blown to the right across the road. So it is important to notice this when you are riding in the city and it is gusting. Whenever you approach a crossroad, a gap in the houses where a road is, you need to brace yourself for a potential gust. Check over your shoulder, see if there's a car about to overtake you, okay? Or whether, if you come to this gap in the road, if there is a huge a huge gust that goes and barrels along down that road and hits you from the side at some speed, have you got enough space to avoid being knocked into the path of the car? Gusts, I recommend you build yourself up to this kind of weather. You should get some practice riding in this ahead of race day so that you know what you're dealing with, so that you can get better at it. But once you are confident at riding in gusts, any kind of really strong gusting, to be honest, if we're talking weather warning level of gusts, then there's a good chance that the bike might end up being cancelled, or maybe even the entire event. They're not going to send you out there in outrageously dangerous conditions. However, you do want to get a feeling for it, but don't push your luck, okay? If you think to yourself, this is really unsafe, don't go. I remember I was riding with my girlfriend at the time, and we were practicing a route to her work, and we came along, and it was gusting, it was blowing so much. that I said, let's turn around, let's go back. It's not safe for us to continue. If, and the idea was that it was for her sake, but really for me, it was towards the upper limit of what it was that I was comfortable riding in. Now, there are better bike handlers out there who will be more confident riding gusts than I am, but it's something you do need to be really careful about. One piece of advice, actually, that I do have to credit Eric Lagerstrom from That Triathlon Life with, that I heard a while ago but really stuck with me, is that if you are riding in a gust and you're in the time trial position, you get hit by a gust, the instinct is to come out of the aero position and to get onto your handlebars to better handle that. But the fact is, by the time that you have been hit by that gust, as long as you're not on the deck, then the worst of it's already over. And yes, there is that part of you that goes, oh goodness, let me get back onto my handlebars. But you can stay in that aero position, because as long as you're not on the floor, you're all right and keep going and just anticipate that next one. But there's a lot more to wind than gusts. If we look at headwinds, this is the enemy of many cyclists. Now, thankfully, most triathlon courses, they're loops, so you're very unlikely to find yourself, in headwind the entire way. That would be quite bad luck. That being said, however, we do need to sort of keep this in mind and go, well, if we do hit a headwind, what do we do? How are we going to approach that? Because it's very, I guess, common for cyclists, especially triathletes, to underestimate the amount of effort that they are putting out when they're going into a headwind. Because our rate of perceived exertion on the bike is somewhat gauged by speed. And if we feel ourselves slowing as we are going into this headwind, then we may have the instincts to, we need to pick things up a little bit. But this is a famous mistake that athletes make, is that they ride into a headwind and they push too hard into it. Because in triathlon, we still have a run to go. And so we need to make sure that we are moderating our efforts and that we are not pushing harder than we need to. You may find yourself passed by all these people. If you look at your power meter, if you look at your heart rate and you go, I need to back off here, I need to slow down, then you need to listen to that. That is really important for you to listen to. Because you will get passed by people who are pushing hard into this, but chances are you will overtake them on the run when they are gassed. So, I really want you to make sure that you listen to your body, you take it slowly, you take it carefully in these headwinds, and you don't get carried away. You don't try to be a hero. Those of you who tuned in last week, you will remember me talking about the drafting effect, about how when you're riding 12 metres or more behind an athlete, you can legally gain an advantage. This advantage is magnified when there is a headwind. If you are riding into a headwind, whatever you do, stay behind the athlete in front. He or she is punching a nice hole in this headwind for you. The air that is hitting you is greatly disrupted and they are giving you a really nice tow through that headwind. I quoted, the figure of you be able to make savings around 11%, I think it was off the top of my head. Into a headwind, those savings may be closer to 20 or 30%. Even if you are going lower than your race target power, stay behind that rider in a legal distance. Okay. Now, when you get out of that headwind, when that headwind subsides, you turn a corner when you're no longer in that position, then you can overtake them and go past them. But you really want to make sure that you are sort of allowing that rider in front of you to do the hard work for you and that you're going along and you're enjoying the benefit of that. Because the amount of extra effort you have to put into a headwind is significant. But don't go over your race power, at least 5-10 watts probably not going to make a huge difference for a short period, but don't push sort of 20-30 watts over your race power to try and hold on to a wheel in front of another rider, because that is a really good way for you to sort of burn yourself out and sabotage your run. You can also end up with crosswinds, where you don't have a headwind, where it's coming at you from the side. Now, if this is gusting, as we just discussed, that can be a problem, but for the most part, these aren't terrible. if you're getting that bit of crosswind. However, if you are watching professional cycling, you will see athletes when they have this sort of this wind coming in from the side, you'll see that the group tends to split apart and people use this as a chance to attack off the front. And everything starts to fall apart a little bit. And you'll see lines of professional cyclists, diagonal lines, who are all trying to hide behind another rider, slightly off centre and slightly behind them, to shield themselves from the wind. Now, this is a fantastic tactic in road cycling, but it has no place in triathlon. Don't try to form an echelon with other triathletes. The reason being that, well, when we are 12 metres away from the cyclist in front of us, then, that's a bit of an issue in itself. But when we are really facing down the reality of when we're racing triathlon, we only have one lane to ride in. At least in the UK, you can fit 2, maximum 3 at a time, cyclists in one lane. If you've got a cyclist riding in the middle of the road, because they are trying to ride slightly off-centre to protect themselves from the crosswind using the cyclist ahead of them, this isn't going to work, okay? Because you're blocking the lane for other faster cyclists who are overtaking you, and it's really inconsiderate. So when you end up with crosswinds, okay, don't try to form an echelon, don't try to be too clever about it. If you're on a group ride, that's different, but on race day, don't clog up the road by trying to find that minor advantage, because you will get a lot of abuse from other cyclists who have to swerve around you or cross onto the other side of crossing over to the other side of the road to pass you, which is dangerous for everyone involved. And then finally we have our tailwind. Now this is wind that's hitting us from behind and is pushing us along as we're riding. If you're doing a triathlon, if you're doing a looped course, chances are that you're going to have a tailwind at some point. Because if it's windy at least, because you're going around in a loop, and you will have a headwind at some point, tailwind at others, even if sometimes it does feel like the headwind is following you around. The tailwind, it's difficult sometimes to know when you're getting a tailwind. Sometimes you can hear sort of a bit of a whistling in your ears as you go along, and you will be going faster for less effort. In these circumstances, it's important to stick to your race power. Don't get carried away. Don't push harder to try and make the most of the tailwind. You still have the run to go. I mean, you could, if you were sort of riding towards the front of affairs, if you were trying to put some distance between you and the other riders, if you want to avoid doing the work for riders behind you who've been sheltering behind you during a headwind section, you could put your foot down in the tailwind, try to get some distance on them so that they're getting less of a benefit from you. You'd have to be working quite tactically at the higher end of the field for that to be relevant, but again, it's still a consideration worth making. The last kind of sort of bad weather, it's not really bad weather, but I'm going to cover it here anyway because it seems only prudent to. I'm going to cover riding in the dark. Now, this is something that a lot of triathletes would never even consider. And again, I'm never going to push somebody to do something they're not comfortable doing, but it's something that I did a fair bit when I started out. Due to daylight hours, lack of turbo training and the like. If you're going out riding on the road in the dark, then visibility is paramount, okay? I have a long sleeve weatherproof jersey that is day glow yellow, and I wear that when I'm out cycling around sort of relatively urban areas. If you're cycling in an urban area and there are streetlights, then you want to have this kind of these brighter colours to make you stick out more. If you are riding on country lanes where you don't have the same level of daylight, lamplight, you want to go for more reflective clothing because you want yourself to be picked out easier by the headlights of cars on the road. So, urban areas wear high-vis clothing. If you are riding on country lanes, then you're going to want to have reflective clothing. You can also get all sorts of accessories, reflective strips and that you can get on clothing or that you can add afterwards to make you safer when you're out riding. You are also going to need lights. Okay, please do not be that cyclist who rides along in the half light without any lights. Okay, I recommend that you keep a set of lights on your bike at all times, those little flashing lights, and you have them running at all times. Because if a driver sees a flashing red light, they're going to go, what's that? Oh, it's a cyclist, I need to overtake them. Rather than just, sort of blazing past you without really sort of thinking about it or paying attention to what you're doing. If you are riding around sort of a more urban area, if you live in a city, then these flashing lights, they may well be enough. Okay, just that flashing there so that people see what you're doing. If you're riding in the countryside, however, you are going to need something punchier, because the little lights are great for lights. The smaller lights are lights for being seen. Bigger lights are lights for seeing. And these are two very different beasts. Now, a big light for seeing, you want to illuminate the road in front of you, which those little lights, those little mini cube lights, even if they're on steady mode rather than flashing mode, they're really not going to illuminate very much. If you're cycling through a park and you want to switch it onto steady mode to be able to light your way through that park, yeah, that's fine. But if you are riding on the open road, you need to see further in front of you. You need to see what's going on ahead of you on the road to minimise the risk of hitting potholes. So you want to get yourself some decent lights to do so. These aren't cheap, but if you are, especially if you're going to be commuting, if you're riding all year round, all weathers, you really need to make sure that you're getting yourself a pair of decent lights. I would recommend broadly against going for sort of the cheap Chinese lights that you can find on the internet. They're okay to a point, but the fact is the battery life will deteriorate on them. I know people who have been out for a ride outside with these lights, having a great time, and they just cut out on them. And they're there in the darkness with no lights and a long way from home. That's quite a scary place to be. So I would recommend going for a brand like Exposure. There are other brands out there as well that do lights. They've come down in price due to LED technology, improvements in battery life. But if you're going to be doing lots of riding outdoors, if you're going to be riding on quiet country lanes, get yourself a nice big pair of lights. It's time now to wrap things up. And I have a message to send you away with. And it's that a lot of you're a bit soft. I'm sorry, there's no kind way to say that. But a lot of triathletes, they spend all of their time riding the turbo trainer. They can't ride it in the rain. They can't ride in the wind. They're focused on the science behind cycling and performance. They're focused on getting as fit as they can be. But they reel at the idea of going out riding outside in anything but perfect conditions. And this will cost you time, hand over fist on race day, if there's anything but perfect conditions. So toughen up, head out into some bad weather, and gain confidence in your training. Don't leave that until race day. Now, you need to build up your confidence slowly. Okay? As I said at the start, don't rush out into really horrible conditions if this is something that you have no experience with. Build it up slowly. You ride in slightly cooler temperatures. Ride in slight winds before you head out into really cold conditions or really windy conditions. Go out when the roads are just wet rather than when it's actively raining. Build up your confidence in that first. Don't throw yourself at this headlong, but you do need to harden up. You do need to head out onto the roads. You do need to get used to riding outside, fixing your mechanicals, coming across all of this problem solving, learning how to corner, all of these skills that a lot of triathletes are woefully lacking in. But I'm going to have to say this. I'm going to have to call you out. Cyclists of North America, a lot of you, not all of you, a lot of you are really bad for this. The whole sort of culture of North America is built around convenience. It's built around sort of car-centric culture, driving everywhere, making things as simple as they can be, air conditioning everywhere. It's all about making life as comfortable as possible. And as a result, you have people who can only do speed work on tracks. They can only swim in a lane if there's no other people in there, and they do all their riding on the turbo trainer. And this just doesn't make for a well-rounded athlete. I understand that in North America there aren't as many roads that you can go out on, but there is a reason that the bike times in Europe are so much faster than the bike times over in the States. If you see everybody around you who is stuck on their turbo trainers, but you take the initiative and you go out and you go, you know what, I'm going to get up really early, I'm going to get up at like 5 a.m. before they have all these idiots in their trucks who want to run me off the road around. And I get in a good 2-hour ride outside, that's going to give me a huge advantage on my competition at the next race, because I'm going to have that bit of extra confidence in bad weather riding outside relative to others. Yes, all the advice I've shared here, a lot of it is unpleasant, it's going to be tough, it's going to challenge you, but it's also going to change you. And I want to help give you an advantage on your competition, which is why I'm sharing this advice. You could ignore this advice and you could go, yeah, you know what, Simon, there's never been rain in the history of my events that I'm doing. I'll handle it on the day if it happens. Cool, good luck to you. But if you want to be a really well-rounded athlete, if you want to be the best cyclist that you can be, you need to be heading out in all conditions. And chances are, if you're in the sport for long enough, you'll have a race day come along where you can utilise all of these skills. And you can find yourself jumping up a number of places simply from the virtue of having experience in these conditions. Turned out to be quite a long one, that. Been over an hour and a half. Thank you for your company. I hope you found that useful. I hope you don't feel too called out, but if you do feel called out, then there's probably a bit of a reason for that. I just want you to be the best athlete that you can be. That's all there is. That's the reason I make the podcast, is because I want to help other people. And those who are in triathlon the longest, those who get the most from the sport, are people who do embrace the kind of the cycling culture, that kind of road cycling side of things, rather than seeing everything simply through the lens of triathlon. So for longevity in the sport, for enjoyment, for the social aspect that can come with it, I do recommend that you get the kit, you get the experience to ride in all weathers, year-round, outdoors, because it is going to keep you motivated, it is going to keep you enjoying the sport for longer. Thank you so much for your company. If you enjoyed the episode, please give me a follow. Please give me a rating, share it with a friend who you think might be able to benefit from it. I'd really appreciate that, help the podcast grow. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you all next Tuesday morning.